Hey guys, John Paulamy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, December 28th, and this is the weekly market update. The disclaimer, anything that you hear or see on this podcast or video is not to be taken as investment advice. I am not a registered financial advisor. I cannot give you personal financial advice. Anything that you hear or see is for informational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence. It's your money. It's your responsibility. Well, first of all, I want to wish everyone happy Christmas, upcoming Happy New Year, prosperous New Year. I will say, just as an end of the year review quickly, I'll have more to say as the final data comes in, but the portfolio did not perform very well this year, or at least in the last couple quarters. This is because I'm particularly invested in value stocks and things that have a contrarian bent. I am not invested in the Mag 7 or the AI boom, although I am trying to play it at the periphery via energy and some other means. But I have confidence that having seen these periods of irrational exuberance in the past, that the view of having a long-term mindset and selling overvaluation and buying undervaluation, I will I will see that the portfolio be vindicated. I've just seen this so many times, and we're just getting even more and more ridiculous with things as we go on. I know I can't measure, I can't forecast how much of an impact the new administration may or may not have. I think there's a lot of uh, people have invested in a certain perception that things are going to turn around. We've talked about it in the last couple of weeks, when Reagan was elected, new morning in America, but things are a lot different now in 2024 going into 2025 than they were in 1980. And as I've said before, I've pointed out that the three threes or whatever, how it's not really going to work, in my opinion. We've talked about that, raising oil production by 3 million barrels per day, although now it seems it's going to be 3 million barrels per day of oil equivalent. I think that's what it's not going to be actual, because there's no way nobody's going to drill for oil and lower the oil price. That's ridiculous. If you put 3 million barrels of oil on the market from U.S. shale, if it was even possible, which I don't even think it is, but if you did, the price would collapse. So why would the oil companies do that? And I don't see any oil companies actually saying they're going to raise their investments. It's not happening. So I think you're going to see this kind of you're sold one thing and then given something else and then call it good. Same thing with reducing the deficit. Uh, I fully agree and think it's possible to do these things theoretically, but in reality, the way politics works and the way that these bureaucracies, how much power that they have, I don't see how you're going to get you may, get the deficit down, like I said, 250, $300 billion a year, but you don't have 4 years and you don't have the support of the Congress. There's some people in Congress that support, cutting, having a balanced budget and all that, but the majority of them don't. That's on both sides of the aisle. And you can't just point the finger at the Democrats. Many Republicans don't want to cut. Okay. Again, because of the 2 and 4 year election cycle, it doesn't lend itself to being invested in long-term solutions. And so this is what, you're pushing a rock up a hill. And so I think there's a lot of optimism built into the markets uh, that has a big chance of resulting in a bunch of disappointment when these things don't happen. And, I don't, it's interesting when you listen to Trump. I remember during his last administration, he was constantly rah-rah in the stock market. Every time it made a new high, he would take credit for it. He isn't talking like that now. He actually has told, I've heard him say a couple times that, hey, this thing looks a little high. You might want to, watch out. Uh, he's couching his statements too, because there's a good chance that, we could have a recession, or a lot of people say we're already in a recession. If you look at some of as we've talked about before, this bifurcated economy, it's really how you want to look at it and where you are in the economy. If you are upper middle class, if you have a decent job, if you have assets, well, you're not really seeing a recession. But if uh, recessionary conditions, if you're in the lower strata and have been subjected to the price increases and the other things that are happening, yes, you have seen some recessionary conditions. You have seen uh, more struggling, more difficulty in making ends meet. This is not, making you feel good about the economy. And so, if you go out and start deporting all these people, that's one of the side benefits. I have my own views. I do believe in the replacement theory, get rid of the native population of whites and African Americans that basically, were the majority populations of this country, because they no longer and import, the peasant class of the third world and use them for cheap labor and, votes. Yeah, I do believe that that is what was going on, because the Republicans and the Democrats both want that. The Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, wants cheap labor. That's what this whole thing about H-1Bs is about. And you're seeing, Vivek and Elon getting ratioed big time on this. People don't want all of these people brought in here. And you had Trump said the same thing. When somebody from a foreign country graduates from one of our elite universities, they should have a green card stapled to their diploma. That's not what the American people want. They want those jobs to go to Americans, to the people here. And so people want, I've been very clear on what my thoughts are on immigration. But if they do start cutting back even on the lower skilled people and start deporting them, you're going to see inflation come back. Lawn care services, pool services, people that build fences, construction, wages are going to have to go up to attract workers to replace basically the lower wage people that you're going to deport. So there's a lot of pitfalls out there. I'm not saying it won't work. I'm not saying they won't pull a rabbit out of a hat, but I think we are so far down the road of decline. It would take a Herculean effort to turn around. People point to Javier Milei in Argentina, but they forget that that's after 70 years of decline. Basically, the wheels had completely fallen off the place, so there was no other option. When we see radical changes like that, the same thing happened in New Zealand about 20 or 30 years ago. The socialist government basically ran the place into the ground. The wheels completely fell off, and then they were ready for reform. Then that went through a period of about a decade, and then again the status come back. And that's what always happens, right? These people, these certain personalities like Milei or Trump get in there, they put these policies, whatever, what have you, Reagan, good times return, and then, the parasitical class starts creeping in, saying, let's start carving off some of this white meat for the you know so we can use it to do what we normally do, which is graft and misuse of funds and all the other nonsense that goes on. Uh, you know, and you have to understand that the way the political process works in the U.S., you're not a king, and so you don't have really you don't really have the mandate that you think you have. Again, there's no constituency for cutting defense. There's no constituency for dealing with the entitlements. They're going to continue to go up until they break the system, and then they'll deal with it. And then you'll get a Malay type character, because there will be no other option except to be radical. But we're not to that point yet. And so, like I've said before, the things that are politically possible are not going to be sufficient. The things that are politically possible in the current political environment will not be sufficient to fix the problems. Okay. And that's just it. And so whatever they do won't get it done. Now, maybe you get a period of we'll see. Let's give the benefit of the doubt, but uh, a lot. What I'm trying to get to is just it could go on for hours about all that, and that'll be people accusing me of black pilling and all that stuff. Regardless, I'm looking at things. I'm trying to game this thing out, because it doesn't matter what I want to happen. If I was king for a day, I could fix the problem overnight, but I'm not. And it's That's not how things work. And I'm already starting to see as I predicted, for example, the media spinning up the state, the deep state, the propaganda organs of legacy media going after this whole thing about immigration. It's going to cost $800 billion to deport all these people. What are you going to do when illegals came here and they had a child? The child's an American citizen. Are you going to deport the parents and leave the child? Are you going to make the child go back to Guatemala with the parents? I mean, all of this stuff, then there's going to be, when they start deporting, hundreds of thousands of people, then they're going to start showing the trains in 1930s taking a certain population to Eastern Europe being deported and trying to attach that to it and showing you the most extreme cases, of, a child clinging to her mother that got picked up at the poultry processor when immigration goes in and raids places. All this kind of nonsense is going to go on, and it's going to wear people down. So we'll see. But all of these things, they have to move very quickly. So I think we'll know within the first 100 days of the administration whether or not they're going to be able to get where they go. Because, like I said, you don't have 4 years. You have to basically maybe a year, year and a half till you get to the first uh, 2 year congressional cycle, right? And you already have Hakeem Jeffries talking about raising $1 billion and going after specific congressional seats. And what did they say they're going to do? As soon as they get a majority again in the Congress, in the House of Reps, they're going to impeach Trump and his whole cabinet. I mean, this is what you people need to understand. You're already in a cold civil war here. It's not going to, this union of a multicultural empire known as the United States of America is not going to exist in 20 or 30 years because of all of the internal contradictions, similar to just like the Soviet Union was fated to end, just because of all the various internal contradictions there. It's the same thing here. No multicultural empire is able to maintain itself. And you're going to see that, get worse and worse, I think, over time. So we'll see if they can pull it off, pull a rabbit out of a hat. I don't think they will. I don't think they really have the support that they think they have in the Congress. And certainly the bureaucracy and the deep state don't support them. They're going to be constantly people coming at them from every direction, trying, Mitch McConnell, all these people, they're going to do everything they can to stymie this agenda. They don't care what you think. They don't care what you voted for. That doesn't matter. There's too much money and power at risk. Oh, well, the plebes, the hoi polloi, the unwashed masses, all those names they called you, had an election. And so this is what they want. So yeah, because we believe in democracy and this is a constitutional republic, yeah, we'll let them do what they want. Please tell me you're not that naive. All right, moving into the slides for this week. So again, from Sentiment Trader, value is nearly, talking about value stocks, is nearly the cheapest relative to growth in 40 years. So what's this telling us? The mantra here is the mission statement is to sell over valuation and buy over undervaluation wherever it exists in the world. And the United States market right now is very overvalued. I mean, it goes without saying. So the retort, the response from the bleacher bum would be, or the person that's, up 600% in Nvidia's, have fun staying poor. Well, again, we've talked about this before. A lot of people make a lot of money in bubbles. That's happened. It happened in the last, I've talked about this ad nauseum. I don't participate in bubbles. I try not to. And uh, I look for things that are undervalued, not overvalued. And I stay within my circle of competence. I don't know enough about NVIDIA chips to have an opinion on it. Okay. Just because something went up and you participate in it doesn't make you a great investor. You you may be a great investor. You may know all the trends and tech trends and know when to get in and get out and who the winners are going to be and all of these various um, you know, technological competitions for market share. I don't know. I do know that creative destruction does work in an economy, and if you have high profit margins, you're going to attract competition. And so, I look for things that are undervalued and have the potential to have a catalyst to move higher. Has that worked in the last year or so? Not as well as I've liked, but A lot of these things that I have, the businesses are doing fine. They're cash flowing. What are they doing with the cash? Paying down debt, buying back shares, initiating and paying dividends. So I'm happy to wait in my less risky sectors. And eventually I know that the worm will turn. But I wanted to point this out because this is your opportunity, right? This is, if you are, and a lot of people are, what happens, as I've said before, because they've had such great success or they've been able to ride the wave, they get euphoric and they just think it's going to continue. And they don't, the smart play would be to get out of things at the top and uh, roll into things that are undervalued. But it's very difficult to do. We've talked about this many, many times before. Even great investors like Stan Druckenmiller have gotten gotten themselves in trouble before. So here's a history of bubbles. I think this is interesting to look at. Says, is Mag 7 a mania? Yes, obviously. You know, a lot of these companies like Apple, they make good products. I have an iPhone sitting right here. I have no problem with it, but it's the valuation of the company. It's overvalued, and whether it's growth prospects. Again, it's such a good company, it's attracted so much competition, like in China, from these various upstart phone companies. And so it's funny, it depends on who you're listening to. This is why you have to be careful about who you listen to. Um, the Chinese uh, are attracted because of the high profit margins to to make phones and devices and other things that can compete with Apple. And so Apple's going to be getting competition from all sides. But what is Apple doing to innovate? It's so large now. How does it move the needle? And when you see somebody like Buffett, who was one of the biggest shareholders selling down his stake, what does that tell you? Okay. A lot of people just wave their hand. Buffett even said several years ago why he bought Apple because he got it wrong. He got it wrong on tech. And so he bought Apple, he wrote it up, he made a tremendous amount of money over the last 10 years or so. And now he's selling down the stake because it's overvalued. Doesn't mean they don't make good phones or good products. They make terrific products, but you can overpay, as we've seen in previous bubbles. The same thing happened with Cisco and Microsoft and these companies back during the tech bubble in the early 1999, 2000. They got so expensive that they couldn't justify the business results. Too much exuberance and linear forward thinking was put into the stocks, and eventually the worm turned. So this is the Nifty 50 I've talked about, which happened in the 60s. It's showing you these are all like kind of starting out at the same point to give you a reference. Here's the gold bubble in the 70s, the Japanese market in the 80s. This is when I lived in Japan. I remember that where they had ridiculous, the Japanese, like 1 acre of downtown Tokyo real estate equaled like all the value of like Manhattan or something crazy like that. Here's the tech bubble, okay, that we were just talking about. Here's when oil went up. We had a oil prices bubble. Here's just the U.S. home price sector that happened in 2008. Really wasn't that big relative to the other bubbles. And here's the current Mag 7 bubble. I mean, it's still going for its moonshot, but it's so much further. I mean, this is the bubble of all bubbles. And so, again, I point out, do I want to be long this at this point? If I don't have a position, do I want to get in now? I mean, can it go up, continue going up? Absolutely. I'm not a fortune teller. I have no idea how high this thing can go. I mean, it can get, just because things are stupid doesn't mean they can't get more stupid. But eventually, this is not where I want to put long-term capital. If you are in the business of building wealth over time, if you're getting in now, if you're buying now, if you're still in, what you're doing is you're speculating that you're going to be able to sell to somebody in the future at a higher price because the valuations of the companies certainly don't represent anything as far as their ability to give you forward earnings, returns on dividends, and buybacks. They're just too expensive. And when you put it in the context of previous bubbles, these aren't just like regular markets. These are previous bubbles that people had the same conversations about. Like this tech bubble, we had the same conversations about this like we're having now about the overvaluation. And this is like double that, triple that. So, and it continues to move higher. So I think, like I said last week, there's a lot of exuberance. There's a lot of things are people have baked in their hopes and dreams based on, this new administration. And I think that, you know, based on the election, and then when the inauguration happens and we see that, it may be a time to sell the inauguration, but we'll see. But I think this is an excellent chart because it puts things in context of previous bubbles. I mean, this is the most bubblicious of all bubbles. They all end the same way, guys. So here's the GMO 7-year asset forecast. Again, emerging markets are the place to be, according to GMO. Your forward returns are looking negative in both U.S. large and U.S. small cap. Um, yeah, because they're overvalued and these are undervalued. So that doesn't mean it turns around tomorrow, but if you're a long-term investor, the opportunities are in emerging markets and international, uh, and not in an overvalued U.S. market. So this is, I use these terms and people will kind of, some people get upset, like, I call the typical retail investor shoe clerks, the bleacher bums, the shoe shine boys, whatever. But it's to make a point. It's not to pick on any individual person, but it gives you a sense that, the people that don't really know what they're doing are the ones that are always in at the last. So if you've got the shoe shine boys and the bleacher bums and the person getting their, Robinhood account with $1,000 and asking me where they should invest, which I'm getting all the time now, this is where you need to, uh, people need to have a different mindset. Okay. The stock market does not exist to make you rich. It's a method for companies to raise capital and for investors to invest in companies. And ultimately, the results of your investments are in the long term are going to be traced back to the ability of the companies that you own to compound their growth in their earnings and cash flow. It's just that simple. And so if you go in with a get rich mentality and you know, and if you're new to investing or if you're uninitiated, we've talked about it before, everybody has to start somewhere, but getting pulled into the gravitational pull of a bubble, if you get burned, you may not ever come back to the stock market. And the stock market over the long term is a tremendous way to uh, compound wealth over time if you use the tool. Just fire is a good tool, just like a lot of things that are possibly dangerous. Driving a vehicle incorrectly is dangerous. However, it's essential for getting around if you use it correctly. If you're speeding around and getting in accidents, well, it's not useful. So it's the same thing, same concept. And so it gets me a little bit nervous when I see things like this as United States this is from the conference board, percent of respondents expecting stock prices to rise over the coming year. And this goes back to 1990, and it's typically vacillates between 30, high 20s% to low 40s%. Now the thing's going exponentially higher. It's broken out and it's, up to about 55%, something we haven't seen in 30 years, 35 years. What's that telling you? It's telling you that we're in a bubble and that the desire, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the envy, the emotions of watching your neighbor get wealthy while you don't, is starting to, overcome people. And so, especially people that are in the market, uh, it's not just retail, it's everybody, professional investors, everybody's in. So if everybody's in and everybody's bullish and everybody expects prices to go up, who's left to buy? Hasn't everybody bought? Or is there this pool of investors that has all this trillions of dollars of capital that are going to push the market up higher? Now, I will grant you that because of passive investments, uh, and 401ks and IRAs and all that stuff, you have a certain floor under the market. But I would suggest to you that if things do turn and people, how things went up because of passive investments, the same thing can happen on the downside. So these are the little things that you put individually, you say, you can shrug them off and say, well, you can't just rely on one indicator. But if you take them in totality, this is not the time to be a buyer of U.S. stocks, especially tech stocks, in my opinion. So here's S&P earnings growth. Ultimately in the short term, we have said that stock prices are driven primarily by liquidity and sentiment. And we've seen that. But in the long term, stock prices are driven by the earnings growth of the companies. And earnings uh, cannot grow more than the economy over the long term. Okay. It's just inevitable that you can have a business that goes through a life cycle and has tremendous earnings at the start, but eventually the market gets, you fill the need and you start, regressing towards, GDP growth. That's why you see a recession. And when you come out of recession, you have tremendous earnings growth because earnings have been suppressed or went down during the recession. Demand went down. Then when you reverse, you can have, double digit or more, uh, but they eventually slow again. And so I wanted to point this out because if we have the view that inevitably and in the long term, earnings power, earnings growth is what inevitably pushes the stock higher, then we have to, take heed of this. So we say this is 2024, the blue represents the Mag 7 earnings growth, right? It was 33%. But the rest of the 490 companies in the S&P, this is S&P earnings. The rest of the S&P companies, the other 490 companies, only had 4.2% earnings growth. Now that's in the context of a 3% nominal growth GDP, positive. So think about that. And the economy that's supposed to be doing so well and has had nominal growth, most of the companies, the majority of the companies in the S&P 500 only had in total 4.2% earnings growth. So everything rests on the Mag 7. So you look at the forecast for next year, and it shows that earnings growth for the Mag 7 is supposed to slow from 33% to 21%. And supposedly, the earnings growth for the other 493 companies in the S&P is supposed to go up 13%. But how is that going to happen if we're already in a 3% positive growth here? Are we going to go to 4 to 5% growth, and that's going to triple the amount of earnings for the S&P 500, the other 493 companies? You see the problem here? Where's this growth coming from? Especially in the context of you're going to start deportations. That means wages on the low end are going to go up. That means inflation. Uh, Deficit spending, okay, is continuing. You have to roll $8 trillion in debt. That means interest rates may go up. I don't see an environment necessarily where this is going to happen. And so if this is what people are betting on, I don't know. Is it possible? Anything's possible. But this is what's out there. So you're going to have the top companies, the top 7 companies, their earnings are going to slow, which is inevitable. But yet the other 493 companies, their earnings are going to go up. So what I'm suggesting to you is if we don't meet these expectations and earnings estimates start coming down, especially if we start seeing, you know, these higher rates are already biting on home building. I mean, with mortgage rates up around 7%. And like I said, you got to roll basically $7.5 trillion of debt this year. Plus, you're going to be adding another, what have you, $1.5 trillion of debt that you have to sell, deficit debt. You're going to sell $8.5 trillion of debt this year. That's a tremendous amount of money. And will the bond market be able to absorb all of that volume? We'll see. So moving on to nuclear power, this is interesting because, the whole nuclear uranium bear market started, was coming back prior to Fukushima. Nuclear power was growing. It was starting to come back mostly overseas. And we had saw the price, I think, get up to around 70 or $80 a pound. prior to Fukushima. Then, of course, we all know what happened with Fukushima Daiichi, the reactor. Everybody panicked. Germany shut its reactors down. Japan shut its reactors down. China stopped its program of building new reactors. Everybody just went, crazy. But I had said all along that Japan didn't have a choice. Japan is an island with virtually no natural resources. And so it's 100% dependent on imported oil and gas and materials. And so there was a reason why Japan many years ago started a nuclear power program. And I said that they would eventually go back. And as we've seen, it's taken a lot longer than people have thought, but they've slowly but surely been, they reassessed everything, um, put new regulations in place, did inspections of all these plants that may be subjected to earthquakes or tsunamis, put different protocols in place, and then slowly but surely been turning the shut down reactors back on. But here we have news now that, I always said that they would go back and to nuclear just because it was out of necessity. You don't have a choice. So it says Japan to maximize nuclear power, bolster renewable energy as electricity demand grows. This is just some snippets from an article, which I'll include in the show notes. A government commission panel of experts on Wednesday largely supported Japan's new energy policy for the next few years that calls for bolstering renewables up to half of electricity needs by 2040, while maximizing the use of nuclear power as the country seeks to accommodate the growing power demand in the era of AI while meeting decarbonization targets. It's funny. I lived in Japan for 3 years. You can't build 400,000 megawatt solar farms in Japan because the places are basically rocks and outcroppings, and it's there's no like flat plains of land. And so I used to work for a company that had an office in Japan, and their little projects would be little rinky-dink projects like 15 or 25 megawatts. They'd stick here or there for solar projects. That's not going to get it done in a advanced industrial economy like Japan. That's why they're going back to nuclear. It's that simple. It's out of necessity. And so, yes, they put these targets on here, bolstering renewables up to half of the electricity needs. It's not going to happen. Renewables are not going to be half of the electricity needs of Japan by 2040. That's 15 years from now. I mean, it's math. It's not going to happen. They don't have the space. They can't do it. They won't do it. And so they say that to help sell the nuclear, but that's beside the point. Anyways, it says the industry ministry presented the draft plan for final review by the panel of 16 mostly pro-nuclear members from business, academia, and civil groups. It calls for maximizing the use of nuclear energy, reversing a phase-out policy adopted after the meltdown crisis at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant in 2011 that led to extensive displacement of residents and lingering anti-nuclear sentiment. But as usual, time heals all wounds. And again, things are done out of necessity. This is the problem that a lot of activists and other people, even investors, don't get. Okay. I don't know of any country in the world or a people in this world that want to have lower standards of living. Who are these people? I'm talking at least in the advanced worlds. Now, there are plenty of globalist leaders that want to do this because they have a view that they can use energy and so-called climate emergencies as a method to get more power because they're sociopathic and want more power. That's the tendency of any organization to grow and get more power, right? And so that's the mechanism that they want to use. But the people themselves don't want to have a lower standard of living. We've talked about Germany ad nauseum. The average person in Germany, their wealth is down or their income is down 2,500 euros per year because of the added costs and everything else that's going on with the deindustrialization of Germany. And so I don't know, and that's why you're seeing the political agitation there. That's why you saw the stoplight coalition collapse and why they're having new elections in February. Now, I don't think the the new party, the Christian Democrats will win, you're just going to rearrange who's at the head of the stoplight coalition because they're still going to have to, because they won't make a deal with the AFDA. No one's going to deal with AFD, even though they, command 20 to 25% of the electorate. Because what are they calling for? Well, they're anti-globalists. They want the pipelines turned back on with Russia, and they want the war to stop. Well, that's not consistent with the, you know, EU's globalist agenda of, Russia, Russia, Russia. And so Japan is in a similar situation. Okay. They don't have some new gas field that's going to bail them out. They don't have the ability to build thousands and thousands of megawatts of solar and wind. It's just not going to happen. And so, unless they want to build more coal plants, which they don't want to do because they are trying to meet these stupid decarbonization targets, because that still has a legacy, zeitgeist among the leadership. The only option is nuclear. And so there you are. And so that's where they end up. And eventually Germany will turn their reactors on too and build new ones. That's my prediction. So Cameco CEO optimistic about the uranium market heading into 2025 despite potential headwinds. This is Tim Geitzel, who's the CEO. He says, quote, "I've been in this game, the nuclear business, for over 40 years, and I don't think I've ever seen the long-term fundamentals as good as they are today, like around the world," unquote, said the chief executive of Saskatoon-based Cameco, who has held that position for almost 13 years. He pointed to recent commitments by more than 30 countries to triple their nuclear power generation capacity, which is something that has not been previously seen. Again, that's one of the catalysts that we didn't see during the last uranium bull market. We didn't have a massive build out. We do now. We have a commitment to nuclear power around the world. Then it goes on here. He's talking about the Westinghouse acquisition that he did with Brookfield. Along with its mining operations, Cameco is as optimistic about the potential growth for Westinghouse Electric, a nuclear reactor manufacturer that Cameco holds a 49% share of. Now, this is Geitzel, who is the CEO of a uranium company, mining company, right? Well, I would say that they're full circle now, right? They process, they enrich, they do everything. So, uh, so take it for as you will, normally he's going to talk his own book, but I think this is consistent with what we've been saying and what our observations are, that this is probably the best that this business has ever been, the nuclear business. So again, barring a setback, a lot of people are like, it's not happening. I'm selling out. They become discouraged. Why isn't it going up then? Couldn't tell you for a bunch of reasons. Okay. We know that from the information that we do get, because this market's so opaque. Like I said, if we had a futures market that was legitimate, like oil or natural gas or gold, then the price discovery would probably happen, but it doesn't have that. Again, it's done with these traders. It's done opaque. It's done by, behind the scenes. No one really knows what's going on. And we do see the term price going up over time, and that's the long-term price. Okay. And that's what we need to focus on. The spot price can go all over the place. And eventually, the demand, you have to buy uranium. Now, there's bottlenecks with enrichment and conversion and all these things. But in the end, these things get solved with capital. Okay. And nobody's stopping building reactors. And we just don't have, you're going to see from one of the veterans of the uranium mining business what he's choosing to do with his resource in a further slide. Well, here it is right here. Here's Deep Yellow. It's John Murchoff run company, the guy that built Paladin in a previous cycle. They have this project in Namibia. I think it's called Tumas. Anyways, here's what they say. They were talking about final investment decision for this mine, whether to build it or not. It says, while FID is expected to be made by early March 2025, the Deep Yellow Board has determined that the commencement of the execution phase of Tumas, full-scale construction, will be strategically determined according to the prevailing uranium price. And then there's this highlighted section here that says, The board firmly believes increases in uranium supply by some analysts are materially overstated in the short, medium, and long term. And there is significant doubt regarding the pace of available greenfield uranium developments in the next 10 years. This, combined with the rapidly increasing demand for commercial nuclear power, cannot justify the current uranium price as a basis for new development startups, and it will need to increase to incentivize new production. So they're not going to develop their mine at the current prices. This was a mine that some people thought would get developed. And so you have a guy that knows the uranium market, that has built a uranium mine before in Africa successfully. Unfortunately, by the time he brought it on during the last cycle, the price was coming down, but that's beside the point. And so what the board is saying, look, we're not going to try to build this mine at the current uranium price. It just doesn't incentivize. It's better to keep the resource in the ground. And so again, you go back here and says right here, it says there is significant doubt regarding the pace of available greenfield uranium developments in the next 10 years. I mean, that's the thesis. I've been pointing this out. So if somebody wants to come at me and say, well, you've been saying this, well, look at the price, what they're normally saying, and I've said this before, and it does hurt feelings, okay, is that my crappy little uranium company that doesn't have any uranium and doesn't have a competent uranium team and has no prospects for ever building a mine hasn't went up. And so therefore, that's my evidence for the lack of a uranium bull market. And I'm mad. And instead of looking at this industry and doing things like just buying the metal, because, if you just buy the metal, then you're not going to get 1,000% return. And that's what everybody wants because they have visions of sugar plums. That easy money, that millionaire maker money, that's that milli maker money, that's already been made. Now it's investing and actually looking at, the idea to just was 5 years ago to go out and just take you know, whatever you had, 10, 20, 30, 100 grand, whatever, and just spread it around all these little juniors that you could buy for, 10, 20, 30 cents. And they went up, some of them into multi-dollar returns. You're not going to get those returns now. That milli maker time is over. Now it's time to actually analyze companies who can bring something online, who's not going to have to dilute. Now you have to look at it as a real business. If you look at the stock price of Cameco, it's up this year, I believe. I'm not saying go out and buy a Cameco, it's overvalued, but that's how you have to look at things. As money comes into this market, it's not going to go into your crappy junior that nobody ever heard about that used to be a gold company a year and a half ago. Okay? It's going to go into the institutional money that's initially going to come in is going to go into the large cap companies, Cameco, Kazatomprom, things like that. Eventually, I believe we're going to get a musical chair situation down the line because no one's going to stop building reactors because it's a necessity to do that. Otherwise, you can't have this AI situation. Okay. And you can't do the full electrification everybody wants to do. Again, it doesn't matter what the US and Europe do. It only matters what's happening in the emerging markets. And you see what's happening there. That's where all the reactors are being built. So again, you just have to be patient. If you're somebody that went 100% in on uranium, then you're not feeling good about this. Again, it's about position sizing, what you bought, where we are in the cycle. These are all things that have to be analyzed. And what happens is, the shiny object is no longer shiny. And so people drift off into the next shiny object. What's the next shiny object? But, you're going to see more of this because, I was listening to Brian Dalton on an interview the other day. He's the CEO of Altius Minerals. If you really want to know about cycles in commodities and resources and how a company takes advantage of them, that management team's probably has the most expertise of anyone in the ability to enter a commodity market and get royalties from companies for properties at the bottom of a cycle at very good terms and then ride the cycles and make a lot of money. They know what they're doing. And he was talking about copper, for example. And he said that, you know, people are saying, well, last year the copper incentive price was $5 a pound. Now it looks like it's around $6 a pound, but it's really about $10 a pound because no one, just because copper goes to $5 or $6, the CEO of Glencore is not going to run into the board and say, okay, copper's at 6 today. Let's go out and spend $3 billion on this mine in Zambia. No, because everybody's gun shy. Well, it's up at 6, but it could drop again to 4 or 3. It takes time. So that price has to keep going up and stay there for some period of time. And that's what we need to see in uranium. Now, remember, as the price goes up, costs go up over time too. Labor costs, material costs, all the inputs you need, these costs go up also. Risks go up. We've seen all you have to do is look to what happened in Niger over the last year and a half, 2 years. So you need a price that's going to allow for super normal profits to really get people to commit the requisite amount of money to actually go out and build these things. And if it's just like, well, at the current uranium price, our internal rate of return is 18% over, nobody's going to build a mine like that. You need super normal profits, and you need to be in the sentiment in the market at that time when these mines get financed and built has to be ultra bullish, and we're just not there yet. So I think that's why we have a tremendous upside ahead of us because psychology works in banks and in boards of directors also, not just among retail investors. So I think this is some of the most important news that I've seen. You're going to see more of this. Even if somebody wants to build something, can they get the financing? Are people willing to step out? You see what the situation is with Global Atomic in Niger. So anyway, that's still bullish on uranium. So here's Morgan Stanley. They're still bullish on uranium too. They have as one of their top. Uh, this is the commodities for 2025 versus less. So it says the case for uranium. Our commodity team placed uranium as their top pick due to the improving risk reward. Supply is likely to disappoint as cuts start to come through and contracting activity should pick up in 2025, leaving a deficit for the year. Well, we will see. We will see. Again, I just put these things up here and say, oh yeah, let's look at what Morgan Stanley says. I'm just saying that, this is I'm sure that they're talking to their clients and saying buy uranium, and this is why. So talking about China, the Wall Street Journal had this takedown article of China this week. I didn't really read it because it was behind a paywall. I don't really care what a propaganda organ of the United States says anymore. I don't believe anything that I hear. Um, I take in information sources, kind of like an analyst does in an intelligence agency. I take in information sources from everywhere, people I know, different media sources all around the world, social media, what have you. And then from that, I kind of try to distill down what's true. Obviously, there are some truths in propaganda from both sides. And so you have to be able to have discernment and read through. But, this idea, we've designated China as our number one enemy going forward, basically because uh, they're going to usurp us as they're already the manufacturing leader of the world, but they will eventually be the technological leader for many reasons, which I'm not going to go into. And so, the United States, that will mean the continued receding of the U.S. Atlantis' hegemon. You already see Europe. Europe's not even in the game. They're not even in the parking lot of the stadium. Forget about it. They're out. They're done. It's going to be a museum. It's going to be a place where Chinese millionaires and billionaires go to hire butlers and nannies and look at the old churches and like I said, open air museum. That's unless the Islamists take over and rip everything down, which looks like is a possibility over the next several decades. But regardless, this is an example. The U.S. is supposed to be this great country. It's a dump. It has a lot of nice places, but it's kind of a dump. Okay. It's in a cold civil war, there's basically 50% of the population at odds philosophically, politically, socially with the other half. And how they don't have this problem in China. That's what I keep telling you. It's a hegemonic, it's a it's a uh it's not a multicultural empire, okay? And so they can focus on things and they have a different culture than we do. They have a different societal basis than we do. That's founded in things that are different philosophically than what we believe in. That gives them certain advantages, okay? This is one of them. So in 12 years, they went from this was their high-speed rail network on the left to this is what it is now. So of course you can go on somewhere and say, well, none of these high-speed trains are rickety. They don't know how to make ball bearings. It's not really what you think. Well, there it is. Okay. Well, they build these things to cities that nobody goes to. All right. Well, I mean, where's our high-speed rail network? They tried to build one in California, right, and spent billions of dollars, and they have achieved nothing. Now we have small little things going on here and there, like Bright Line and things like that, but it's nothing like what is in China, what they've done in 12 years. This is 12 years. This isn't 30 or 40 years of build out. This is in 12 years. So part of the whole thing was the lost cave decade under Xi Jinping, supposedly, in 2012 till now. So in that time, and of course, the wags are going to come and say, you can't believe Chinese data. It's all lies. Well, I'm sure there is a bias to it, but you can see. So these rails don't exist. So they don't lead global car exports. Somebody said, well, I bought a Chinese car and I would never buy another one because it did this and this. But then you see it's some off-brand manufacturer. It wasn't like a BYD or one of the top manufacturers. So I don't know. There's a lot of incentive in the US to live off the glory years. It's kind of like that Bruce Springsteen song, right? Glory years or whatever. So you're living off the sitting in the bar when you're 45 talking about how you were the high school quarterback at your, uh, 1A high school. You were the star quarterback when now you're, working as a roofer on your second divorce, sitting in a bar, raising a drink saying, yeah, should have saw me t 30 years ago. I mean, that's kind of the US. So here's the lost decade that the Wall Street Journal was talking about and how horrible China is under Xi Jinping. So you see GDP is up from about a little bit over $8 trillion to close to 18 trillion. You see manufacturing in trillions is 2.5 trillion up to 4.5 trillion. The number of Chinese companies in the Fortune 500 has went from about 70 to 140. That's doubled. Exports 2 trillion up to 3.5 trillion. Retail sales 20 trillion yuan to over 45 trillion. Car exports basically 500,000 in 2012, up over 5 million units a year. So I guess the accusation would be, well, you cherry pick the data. No, I'm not cherry picking the data. Okay. Um, what woke me up to this was reading like uh, a good paper that Horizon Kinetics had about this, about how the Chinese will use their home market to like build their phones or whatever, roll them out to their consumers, get the bugs out of it, kind of same thing they did with electric cars. And then once they've kind of gotten things straight in their home market, their ability to then become an exporter and export those things. And that's why you're seeing all these things around having a trade war with them and tariffs and all these things because we simply can't compete with them. Okay. For many reasons that we went over before. And maybe in certain areas we'll be able to, but you know, um, people got really mad at Vivek this week for saying basically what I've been saying for a long time. Okay. And what's interesting is there's some truth in what he said. People here don't have the work ethic. They don't have they're, you're not going to work 80 hours a week. That's, you know, I live close to SpaceX. I know of people that work over there. If you're going to work at SpaceX, you're going to work 80 hours a week. People live out there stuff. And, you're going to work like Elon works, expects you, or you're not going to work there. You're not going to, you don't go into an interview there and say, well, how much vacation do I get my first year? They're trying to go to Mars. Okay. And that's not the ethic of most people. Most people say, well, what are my benefits? And this is what happens in a society that becomes soft. And that's why, whether you agree with having all these immigrants come here or not, even the high skilled ones, they're willing to work. Now, I have other issues with it. People don't want to, I believe that there are uh, these companies try to do to get over and, get low wage workers in here for other things. But um, there was some truth to it about how, if you're in a Chinese household or Indian household of people that expect you to become an engineer or a doctor or something like that, you're not sitting around watching TV playing video games. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's how it is. And so, we'll see. Again, this isn't reflected. None of these things are reflected in Chinese markets, stock markets, because in the West, at least, we've completely vilified China. I'm not saying that the Chinese Communist Party are good people. No politicians in any country are good people. But I don't see them in the last 20 years going around invading and starting wars all over the world. That's the purview of the United States and its allies, the death and destruction they've caused all over the world. So, you can take it as you want. People bag on the Belt and Road Initiative, but they're not going in and invading countries and building railroads and power plants. They're being invited in. They're doing these things. Are they doing it for a mercantilist, imperialist method? I don't know. But, they're not going around, invading and causing, all these political, look for example, this look at the West and their so-called democracies. Okay, you have Zelensky in Ukraine, who's declared martial law. His term is over with. The Constitution there says he should not be the president. They should revert to the head of the Rada and they should have new elections. But he's just ensconced himself as, you know, president. Is that democratic? Well, they're in a war, John. Okay, they had a war. We had World War II and they had an election. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had an election. They didn't suspend the election. Well, it's different. Oh, okay, it's different. Then you go to Moldova, Maya Sandu. Most of the people in Moldova don't want her as the president of Moldova because she's a EU globalist stooge. Okay. And so they were able to get her in by doing what? By allowing the Moldovan diaspora in the EU and around the world to vote, except for the Moldovans that are in Russia. They had like one or two polling places in Moscow, and they weren't allowed to fully participate. Is that democracy? Look what's going on in the EU. Okay. Macron, his party, nobody wants the guy. Okay. And so he's finagled his way to stay in power. You've had, they're going to have elections in Germany now, but you're not going to get, just going to rearrange the deck chairs of the current coalition. It's just going to be rearranged because CDU, CSU is not going to make a deal with AfD. It's not going to happen. It goes on and on and on. And people want to talk to me, about democracy. You see now, it's interesting that Bashar al-Assad was toppled in Syria. And people are saying, wow, they found, you really don't know what really happened there. I'll tell you though, that these are tribal people. You have different factions with different religious beliefs and hatreds that go back. And so as soon as so we have a former guy that was on a terrorist watch list that had a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. All of a sudden now, they dressed him up like Zelensky, trimmed his beard, gave him a PR thing, and he's the new, uh, you know, freedom fighter. They're going to have peace with Israel. I mean, are people this naive? Yes, they are. Propaganda does work. It does work on most people. I'm for whatever CNN tells me. Turn that TV on, it'll tell me what to think. So going back to the EU, like I said, they're not even in the, forget about being in the game. They're not even in the stadium. They're not even in the parking lot. They don't, they can't find the EU. They're MIA. So this is like what we talked about technology leading, where China's leading, the US is leading, kind of a Venn diagram. So China leads in drones, advanced batteries, 5G, US leading big tech, advanced physics, biotech and pharma, and then it's contested here in the middle, chips, advanced manufacturing, next gen networks and AI. And the EU's not even in the game. What do they lead in? Regulation. And so I've said it before and I'll say it again. You're basically running out of time in Europe. Um, you've set yourself up. You've allowed an alien population to come in that breeds faster than you. Demographics is destiny. You need to deal with a lot of issues immediately, and I just don't see European man being able to do that. I can't envision a society that will not protect its women and children that will continue to exist. I see these situations I read about, like in the UK, where you have these rape gangs from Pakistan or whatever, and they victimize an English teenager. You're dead. You're dead. It's that simple. Where are the fathers and uncles and cousins and brothers? You're dead if you do that to one of my kin or kind. You'll just die one way or another. It may not be soon, but you might open the door one day and the last thing you see before you hear a shotgun blast is a masked man standing there with a sawed-off shotgun pointing at your throat. Does that sound vicious? I'm telling you the way things are, and that's what's required to fix this problem. So forget about the economics of the thing. Forget about the globalism. Where are the men in Europe? The amount of to fix this is the thing that scares people when I start talking like this. But I'm looking at a historical perspective. The level of violence required to fix this now is almost inconceivable to most people. You think you're going to remove all of these people now? They're having 5.8 children each or whatever. You're not even having children. They stand in the street and yell this in your face. We are here. We're not leaving. You will submit to Islam eventually. You don't have children. I've seen that so many times in these street protests. You'll have some Englishmen or wherever they're at arguing with these protesters, like Palestinian, Middle East supporters, Islamics, whatever, and they just yell back in your face. You're going to submit eventually because this is going to be a Islamic state eventually because you don't have children and demographics is destiny. And where are the men? Look at look at the men of the EU. Why is Ursula von der Leyen in charge of anything? These ridiculous people. And so if you just want to go back to economics and investing, I mean, the EU is just in terminal decline. And like I said, what would take to change it? I mean, a complete collapse. And that might not do it. And it might be so far gone now, I mean, that it ends up being like Syria down the line. You all these different groups that came from these areas, you see how they have the internecine fighting there amongst themselves. You don't think they're going to bring that to Britain and Sweden? That's already happening. Look at all the bombings that happen in Sweden between the different, you know, Somali gangs and all. I mean, you don't hear this stuff. And so you have to remove these people. Do you think they're going to want to leave now? They are sufficient numbers now that it'll be very difficult to do. And they will practice violence. I've heard many of them say, I've heard many Muslims get into these rages, especially on MEMRI, where they show the from the Middle East, the mosques, the 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 lectures and the preaching. We love death, you love life. This is the philosophy. The death in the furtherance of jihad is a blessing for them. That's not our culture. And so how are you going to turn this around? So, you know, forget about, and the United States is all for this. Goes back to what the first General Secretary, I think, of NATO said that the purpose of NATO was to keep the US in Europe, keep Russia out of Europe, and keep Germany down. And so goes Germany, so goes the rest of the EU. So maybe, again, it goes back to what I said before, you're not going to vote your way out of this stuff. If you look throughout history, that's not how real change happens. I'm sorry to tell you. And so the easy thing will be just to go along, get along, hope that you'll be the last gazelle at the watering hole. You're going to see increased immigration into Russia. It's already happening. There's tons of YouTube videos of families that have moved to Russia from US, Canada. I know of, people that have moved there. Where else are you going to go? You're going to go to the US? It's going to fracture eventually. We're going to go live in Colombia. I mean, so this is why I say there's tremendous economic, social, political, seismic events that are building. And, I'm not that optimistic. And you see, if you're in these places where you have these populations that are continuing to grow, I mean, you have a situation where they're going to start fighting amongst themselves. And so you're just going to hide out. And then what's interesting is if you believe, as I do, I'm getting off track here, but I want to say this. If you believe what I do in female hypergamy and that women want to be around strong, masculine people, that, you're a conquered people. Your women are going to they say that too. Your women are going to be drawn to Islam and drawn to these people. And what are you going to do about it? Sit in the pub and have another round? Again, no one wants to be that martyr. No one wants to be that patriot because, you're going to get put up against a wall and shot. And I'm just telling you what's going to happen. More than likely, these populations will submit to the invader because that's the easiest thing to do. I mean, how many hundreds of years did it take to get Islam out of Spain the first time? So I don't see any of these Charlemagnes or these these people, uh, you know, uh, John Sobieski the third, who basically liberated Vienna, the siege of Vienna. Okay, I don't see these people, so it's not going to be good politically and economically for the EU. I mean, it's interesting just to watch living in a home that's completely infested with termites that's falling down around you. You have to deal with the infestation and then do the rebuilding, and nobody's doing anything. So here's an article here. You know, it's always about money and power. You always have to ask cui bono, who benefits. People say that's cynical. People say that's angry. I'm just telling you what the reality of the situation is on this material earth, this fallen world. So here's a blurb here. It says, now that Assad has fallen, there is no political obstacle to building the Qatar-Turkey gas pipeline. The planned pipeline, which runs through Syria, is meant to provide Europe with an alternative Russian gas. This is another thing that's going to be an emerging problem. The emergence of Turkey. Turkey has said for a while that it wants to be a gas hub for Europe. Then you couple this with the fact that um, you have this tiny state here, Israel, that believes in a greater Israel, which encompasses all of this. And then you have this Erdogan character who thinks he's the new, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and wants to. I mean, this is not a recipe for good things to happen. And do I think this pipeline gets built? I don't know. Is that the only motivation behind this? No, but it's part of the motivation. And, we'll see. But you always have to look behind the curtain. What are people really trying to achieve? It's interesting that Israel immediately moved into parts of Syria that are basically encompassed in the greater Israel boundaries that they're not shy about talking about. You see the patches on some of the IDF soldiers. I've seen them showing the map of the greater Israel. This Erdogan is a wannabe, like I said, Ottoman, wants a resurgent Ottoman Empire. That leads to me to believe that is there going to be an eventual confrontation between Turkey and Israel? That's possible. I mean, so this is going to be more of that, what's that Richard Marbury used to call, I think he's still around. I don't know if he still writes this newsletter. This whole area that encompasses North Africa, this area goes through here and through, well, it did for a while into the various stans, called it chaos stan, okay? And that's what it is. And you're dealing with people that are really radical in their thinking, tribal people, people that have a followers of a 7th century made up religion that's very expansionist, and it's not a good mix. Throw in a lot of cousin marriage. It's a big problem. So I don't know, but yeah, this wasn't because rehabilitating basically an Al Qaeda guy that had a $10 million bounty on his head to be the new democratic savior of Syria. You know, I mean, there is no hypocrisy, no ridiculous amount of ridiculousness that the U.S. State Department and its other, you know, hegemonic partners will go through to, I mean, what is the game here? It's like they're just playing a game. What are they trying to do here? Okay, just create constant chaos. And I have to say this in Israel's defense, they got what they wanted. They got what they wanted. One by one, their enemies have fallen, and the other potentials, like you don't hear a peep out of Egypt. You don't hear a peep out of Saudi Arabia. Okay. You don't hear a peep out of the Jordanians. Okay. Libya taken out. Iraq, Saddam Hussein taken out. Syria, Assad family taken out. So you have to give them credit. It took them 20 years and probably added about 15 or 20 trillion dollars to our national debt. We have a lot of veterans that are sleeping under bridges, dying of suicide, cut off, blown up limbs. But hey, there you go. And then, we're sitting here watching a Holocaust take place among the in Gaza and these other places, and no one cares. So you have to give them credit. Uh, well played. Okay, that's it for this week. Again, we talk about these things not to make a political point. We have no ability to affect these things. What we have to do is look at things for the way they are. We have to have a view on it because it's going to affect things. We have to be aware of what's happening. Okay. And, what would happen if, in fact, this pipeline, for example, got built and Turkey did become the gas hub of importation of gas into Europe? Okay. Well, that nullifies any potential rapprochement with Russia in gas. Okay. So, and that would increase the stature of Turkey. Okay. So you have to look at these things for like, and the US, wants to have more exportability of its LNG. Okay. So a lot of these things do have side benefits, you know, and again, it's not just some people sitting around in a smoky room with a 40-watt light bulb determining what's going to happen. There's different factions and different interests that are always competing, and sometimes they align for certain things, and sometimes they're at opposition with each other. But these things continue to happen around the world. That's why I say the amount of political and economic and social instability is going to grow going forward, not in my opinion. Okay. So this presents a lot of opportunity for speculations. Okay, that's it for this week. Appreciate the support. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.